Hello, and welcome back to the Navigating Possibility podcast. I'm Dr. Christina Adams. Today, what I'd like to talk about is a little bit different than the things we've talked about in this podcast so far. What I'd like to talk about today is advocacy, specifically legislative advocacy on the part of ourselves and our patients, and how we can use that to improve our sense of agency and decrease burnout. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experience with advocacy, how I've gotten involved in it. I'll discuss the literature that exists on advocacy and burnout, which is fairly limited, but is there. And then I'll talk about ways that individual physicians can get involved in advocacy efforts and how and why I think that improves burnout. So, first of all, I'm going to talk a little about my road to advocacy today. Back in 2016, when I was about 10 years into practice after finishing residency, I finally got the opportunity to go to ACOG's National Clinical and Scientific Meeting. ACOG is the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and I'm going to be talking about ACOG a lot, so just kind of want to level set what I mean when I say that word. And as an OBGYN, that is my specialty society. And when I finally got to go to that meeting, I signed up for a course there, and the title of the course was How to Boost Your Office Productivity and Have Fun Doing It. That was totally a bait and switch title because the object of the class was leadership skills. Specifically, I think the class was designed to get us to figure out how to be better leaders within our office situations, with the thought that that would help boost our productivity and our happiness within our office situations. But one of the people who taught that class then left that class and went straight to the convocation to basically be named the next president of ACOG. And during that course, the people who taught it, and there were 3 people who taught it, talked about getting involved in leadership in ACOG. And one of the ways that they mentioned was a good way to start getting involved in ACOG leadership was to attend a conference that ACOG puts on every year called the Congressional Leadership Conference, or the CLC. So this is what they refer to as a fly-in day, where OBGYNs from across the country, all the different states, come to Washington, D.C., and usually the conference runs from Sunday to Tuesday. And we have certain things that ACOG has organized for all the physicians who fly into that conference to go to Capitol Hill on Tuesday and ask our legislators for. Usually it's some hot topic that has a bill associated with it so that we can ask for something specifically for them to either co-sponsor or support. Sometimes it's just, here's a hot topic for us as OBGYNs that we need somebody to draft a bill for. And so basically we go, and for Sunday afternoon and Monday, we learn about, we get a refresher course in how bills become law, kind of like Schoolhouse Rock. And we have experts on the topics that we're going to be discussing with our representatives and senators who come to teach us about those topics. So we learn statistics, we learn the ins and outs of those issues, because most physicians aren't public policy experts, but we are experts in how the medical system affects us and our patients. And so the idea of the educational piece beforehand is to bridge the gap between what we know already going into the situation and the information that the lawmakers and their aides are going to want to know when we actually go to Capitol Hill and ask for what we want, so that we can have informed conversations in both directions. So, like I said, I went to the clinical and scientific meeting in 2016. I came back. I had a friend who had been a partner for the first 5 years that I was out in practice, who had gotten involved in ACOG. And I said to her, I want to get involved, help me. And so she took me under her wing, started taking me to the district meetings, which are basically, Florida is its own ACOG district. And she started taking me to the district meetings and introducing me around to the leadership of the district, and started helping me try to get involved. And when the call came for people the next year in 2017 The call came for people who wanted to go to the Congressional Leadership Conference. She sent me that email. I signed up and I got a slot. So I started going to the Congressional Leadership Conference in 2017, and I've been almost every year since. One of the COVID years when it was virtual, I didn't block my schedule to attend it virtually, but almost every year since I've been. And it is my favorite conference of the year. It is a big ACOG pep rally. Basically, you have a large ballroom at a hotel that each year the number of participants has grown from, I think the first year I went there, it was maybe 400 or 500 people. And last year it was almost 800 people. All people who are there to advocate on behalf of patients and physicians in the OBGYN space. And it has become a hugely important part of my conference planning for the year. I love going to that meeting and try always to make myself available to go. So that's kind of how I got involved in all of this. Started with kind of a bait and switch title of a course. That's a clinical and scientific meeting, and wrote me in, and I've been going since. I have also been involved on behalf of ACOG District 12, the Florida district, in attending the Florida Medical Association meeting. So the Florida Medical Association, like most state medical associations, is an organization that represents the physicians in Florida. And in Florida, the Florida Medical Association has a pretty big voice with the Florida legislature in terms of when state lawmakers want to draft bills for healthcare policy in the state. They often will consult the Florida Medical Association and ask what their opinion on things is. And the Florida Medical Association House of Delegates meets each year to set policy for the Florida Medical Association. And so I have been going to that meeting as well as a representative for ACOG District 12 since about 2017, maybe 2018, but about the same amount of time, and have gone through their Physician Leadership Academy, where they have young physicians. At the time that I went, I was still younger, and they have the young physicians who come to 5 different sessions over the course of a year, and get 4 of those sessions are in conjunction with the Board of Governors meeting. And so you get to network with the people who are in the leadership of the Florida Medical Association. And it also teaches you some leadership skills. They bill it as a mini MBA for physicians. And so it teaches you some sort of business administration things over the course of that year that you're a part of that leadership academy, which also was extremely valuable to me and led to making a lot of friendships across the state with physicians in different specialties who are interested in advocacy. So that's how I got involved in advocacy. Oftentimes people will ask me, why do you want to get involved in advocacy? Doesn't that make your burnout worse, not better? And I'll talk a little more later in this podcast about how it's exactly the opposite, largely through building community, finding groups of friends who are of a like mind with you, and feeling like you have a sense of agency to do something about the parts of medicine that you don't like. So that's my thought process as to why I believe that advocacy is a good thing for physicians to get involved in, and that it helps mitigate burnout, not make it worse. And I have a post on my website that talks about this it was written several years ago, and it's called Lobbying in Organized Medicine: Why Physicians Can't Seem to Get What We Want. And so if you want to read a little bit more about this process and these different experiences that I've had, you can go to my website, ChristinaAdamsMD.com, find the blog, and look for that post, and I'll link that in the show notes. So one of the things that I find interesting is parallels between things that happen in my life and things that happen in my career. And when my kids were younger, we signed them up for karate. And they teach these kids in karate to take up space and to use their voice. And I think this is one of the things that advocacy can teach physicians: to take up space and to use our voice. The kids are taught that, being in sort of the karate stance and being loud is a way to protect themselves against bullies and people that would harm them. And I feel like there are some parallels there between physician advocacy and my kids' martial arts experience. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the basics of advocacy. I think that legislative advocacy is a necessity for us as physicians to change the things that we don't like about medicine because nobody's coming to save us. And I've said that before in previous episodes, but if we want to change things about medicine, we have to be the ones to ask for that change. I would love to see us as physicians partner with patients to come together and ask for the healthcare system to serve the needs of both patients and physicians better than it currently does. That's a level of organization and a level of coalition building that I would love to be involved in, but is beyond the scope of just one individual physician. And I think that that's something that we as physicians need to advocate for. But nobody's coming to save us. If we want to change things about the healthcare system, we have to show up and participate in the process. And physicians aren't traditionally good at this. But everybody else who's involved in medicine is really good at this. Trial lawyers have a big lobby. The American Hospital Association has a huge lobby. Insurance companies have a big lobby. And one of the things that you learn as you get involved in advocacy is sort of how the sausage is made, right? So unfortunately, and I wish it weren't this way, but unfortunately, money talks in politics. And physicians are described oftentimes as like herding cats. Like we each have our own little interest groups. We each have our own specialty societies. And I'm not discounting the importance of those specialty societies, but I think oftentimes because we aren't organized with one voice, we dilute our impact. And unfortunately, other organizations have much larger financial resources and much higher numbers of members in their organizations. And so therefore, those organizations have more influence with lawmakers. So one of the things that we as physicians need to be better about is figuring out how to organize in ways that maximize our influence. Right now, however, what I'm encouraging people to do is just start somewhere. Start with the access points that you have. So everybody's specialty society has an advocacy arm. Pretty much all of them do. ACOGS is pretty robust for fairly obvious reasons, all the legislative things that have been thrown up and roadblocks that have been thrown up in the way of OBGYNs. But we're not the only ones. Pediatricians are developing a huge advocacy wing right now because of all the changes that are going on in HHS. But your specialty society most likely has an advocacy wing. If that's a place that you feel comfortable getting involved with people within your specialty, then I would encourage you to look into that and see how you might get more involved in that. State medical associations, like I mentioned earlier, I'm involved in the Florida Medical Association. Your state medical association has a way for you to get involved. Your county medical society is a good gateway to get involved in the state medical association because most of the time, the House of Delegates for the state will be made up by representatives from the different counties. You can find other political organizations that align with your issues outside of medicine. And one thing that has come about in the last year or so is the evolution, and I don't know how old this app is, but there's an app called the 5 Calls app. And basically what it does is it gives you an easy way to call your representatives and senators because it puts their phone numbers in one place. And it will rotate information through about issues that are current event issues and have scripts for you to either follow word for word if you choose, or as a jumping off point to write your own script to call your representatives and senators and voice your opinions on things. Sitting and staying quiet about things that bother us about medicine is not going to move the needle. It's not going to change anything. So we have to be proactive and get involved because, again, this is one of my favorite things to say, and I'll say it again, no one is coming to save us. We have to do this work ourselves. So one of the phrases that encapsulates that idea, I heard at one of the very first congressional leadership conferences that I went to, and it's this thought that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I'm going to say that again. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I don't think any of us relish the thought of being on the menu. So we have to figure out how to pull up our seat at the table and make our voices heard. At one of the most recent congressional leadership conferences I went to, there was a representative from Texas who was there speaking to us. And I wrote down this quote: "There is no profession other than the military where the government is so directly involved in the business of what you do, yet there is no profession whose members are less involved in politics." And I think that that's part of the problem. I think that we need to step up and make our voices heard and take our seat at the table so that we get off the menu. So, one of the things that I said at the beginning of this I was going to talk about today is literature about advocacy and burnout. Most of the things that have been written about this, when you go and search it, are opinion pieces. There are not a lot of actual data, but this is people telling you their experiences and the experiences of people that they've interviewed about how getting involved in advocacy improved their burnout. I will link a list of these in the show notes as well, these articles. But the things that they discuss are things like I have mentioned already and will mention later in this podcast. You develop a network of friends who think like you do, and getting involved in advocacy and making your voice heard makes you feel like you have some agency in changing the things about medicine that you don't like. I'm going to talk a little about my personal experience. So I mentioned the Congressional Leadership Conference. It's a national conference. I have been going to it since 2017. And here are my takeaways. Here are the things that I have learned from going to the Congressional Leadership Conference. Number one, when you actually go to meet with your legislators, whether you go to Washington, D.C. and meet with them there, or whether you meet with them in their local offices, because they all have offices close to where you live, maybe not your senators, but your congressional representatives all have offices within the district, as well as in Washington, D.C. And you can call and try to set up an appointment there. It's probably easier to get one with your representative in the local office than it is to get one in Washington, because when they're in Washington, there's a lot of competing interests and a lot of things for them to do. But if you do go through, say, your specialty society or your state medical society, then oftentimes they will assist you in setting up a meeting for your legislator while you're in Washington, which is what we do when we go to Congressional Leadership Conference. And when you go to these meetings, sometimes you walk into these huge government buildings and it can feel fairly intimidating. And you feel kind of like, Mr. Smith goes to Washington, like you're this little mouse in this giant building. But when you really think about it, the people that you're meeting with most often at these conferences in your legislators' offices are their health legislative aides. These are people who are in their 20s, who are trying to learn the ropes of politics, and they may know a good bit about policy, but they have to know a lot about a lot of different types of policy. And you're there to ask for a specific thing about which you are the expert. So the first thing that I took away from going to Congressional Leadership Conference is not to be intimidated going to speak to your representatives and senators, because you know more than they do about your issues. You are the expert in your issues. So let that calm some of the nerves about going into a meeting with legislators. They do want information and data, but mostly what they want from us as physicians is our stories about how the issues impact patients and physicians. That's our magic. So as Brene Brown says, stories are data with soul. Stories are data with soul. So that's what we can bring to the table. And then the other piece that I learned at Congressional Leadership Conference, I kind of alluded to earlier, is money talks and politics. And that's comes from a lens of getting involved in your political action committee. So either the political action committee for your specialty society or for your state medical society or for the national, the AMA. There's strength in numbers. So it's not just about the actual dollar amounts that are donated to a PAC, but it's also about the number of members that PAC has. So both are important. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about sort of my personal experiences at the state level. So again, since about 2017, I've been a delegate from my ACOG district in Florida to the Florida Medical Association House of Delegates. Did the Leadership Academy that I mentioned earlier, that leadership training program for a year. and then have sat on reference committees and chaired a reference committee. Now, reference committees, at least in the Florida Medical Association, and I believe that it works similarly in the AMA, or the American Medical Association, although I've never actually been a delegate to the AMA. But reference committees are where people who are members of the organization write resolutions about issues that they would like the organization to take a stance on. And those resolutions get referred to a reference committee. At the FMA House of Delegates, there are 4 reference committees. And those reference committees then take each of those resolutions and have a hearing during the House of Delegates weekend, and people can come and comment on the different resolutions. So they're all published online. Individual members of the FMA can come in and make comments about the resolution in support of it, against it. And then the reference committee takes all of those comments and all of that feedback and consolidates them to either recommend that the resolution be approved, recommend that it be not approved. Adopted is actually the language that's used, adopted or not adopted. And sometimes they use all that feedback to tweak the language of the resolution to make it more acceptable to the majority of members of the organization, or to better reflect what the author of the resolution actually wanted once that author hears everybody's feedback in the reference committee meeting. And then those are basically placed on a consent calendar, and they go to the main House of Delegates. And unless someone asks for them to be pulled out and debated on the main floor of the House of Delegates, then they get adopted. So the reference committee actually plays a pretty big role in how the House of Delegates operates, because what we recommend be adopted, if nobody objects to it, it gets passed as policy. So it's been very rewarding to me, I think, to serve on those reference committees and be a part of that process. On the state level, I have also been involved in ACOG's State Committee on Professional Liability and Legislation for the district, for the Florida district, for the last several years. I took a day off a couple of years ago, back when the 6-week abortion ban was being discussed in Florida, and drove over to Tallahassee to testify in front of a state Senate committee about that issue, about what the impacts of that abortion ban would be for my patients and for physicians. And in a few weeks, I will go over to Tallahassee with some younger OBGYN physicians within the district to advocate for bills that are currently in front of the legislature. So there are a multitude of ways to get involved in advocacy. Some of them involve flying into Washington, D.C. and doing things on a national level, but all politics is local. And so you don't necessarily have to do that. You can exert your influence and pull up your seat at the table more on a more local basis as well. So for me, the biggest way that being involved in advocacy has helped me pull out of burnout and stay out of burnout is building a community of like-minded friendships. So when you go to the Congressional Leadership Conference and you're sitting in a ballroom with 600 or 700 or almost 800 OBGYNs, or when we all meet and take a picture on the steps of the Capitol building in Washington, and you see the mass of people who have come in from all over the country to advocate for the same things that you're there to advocate for, it's very energizing. In-person meetings in our world that has moved to such a virtual presence since the pandemic are great opportunities to spend one-on-one time with each other as busy physicians that we don't often get the opportunity to do without these meetings. And it has allowed me to develop amazing friendships with other OBGYN physicians in the state. And being involved in the State Medical Association has also allowed me to develop friendships with other physicians outside of my specialty. So going to those in-person meetings, being around people who are politically minded and advocacy minded has been a great opportunity to build friendships. And those friendships help outside of the advocacy space. So networking with other people basically helps us see that there are other options out there that may be better than our current clinical situation. So if you're in a job where you feel stuck and you don't know what to do, going and talking to other people about where they are sometimes helps you to see that there are other avenues that you can pursue that might make you happier. And you can just brainstorm solutions to issues that exist in your practice or issues that exist in your hospital. You can talk to people who've dealt with this situation in a different way in a different organization. Again, just having the opportunity to get together with physicians and building that community. One of my mentors in the coaching space constantly says, we heal in community. We don't heal in isolation. And so I think getting together for these conferences gives us the opportunity to be in community with one another and can help pull us out of burnout and mitigate burnout. And it also just improves your sense of agency. It makes you feel less helpless. Like, even if it takes a long time to get something passed. There was one bill that we advocated for at the Congressional Leadership Conference for 2 or 3 years, and it finally passed, and it passed while we were there. It was a funding bill for maternal mortality review committees, and it passed while we were actually in Washington, D.C. advocating for it for the second or third consecutive year. And that was very gratifying to see it happen. We also get to develop working relationships with legislators and their staff. We pass cards. You can develop a relationship with your local lawmaker and offer yourself as an expert in this subject to say, if you have a question about health policy regarding this issue, please call me. I want to make myself available to you. Again, how often they'll do that remains to be seen. Sometimes they will and sometimes they won't. Probably depends on the political bent of your local legislator. But at the same time, feeling like you're putting your voice out there again, taking your seat at the table, rather than feeling like everything is happening to you without you, is much better than just not being in the loop on things and not getting involved. I have really enjoyed helping younger physicians, residents, and younger physicians learn to advocate from having done it for a while. So one of the people who has been involved in the Florida ACOG district for a long time talks about going to Congressional Leadership Conference and says the first year you go for yourself. The second year you go for your patients. And then after that, when you go to this meeting, you go for your colleagues and for younger physicians. And that's absolutely true. The first time you go, you're trying to figure out what it is you're doing. The second time you go, you're a little fired up and you're going because you've got something that you want to advocate for on behalf of your patients. And then after that, you realize that you've done this for a while and you can help younger physicians learn the ropes and learn how to advocate. And it just builds an army of people who aren't afraid to go ask for what they want from their government, which it's a good thing. It's what we need. And it increases your personal confidence. So again, the first time you go, you walk into these government buildings and they're huge and they're intimidating. And by the third year or so, you walk in there like you know what you're doing and you know where you're going and you're much more comfortable with the process after you do it for a bit. So it just increases your level of confidence. And getting involved in advocacy also can help us reconnect with our why. So most of us wrote personal statements when we went to medical school, when we applied to medical school. And most of us in that said some version of, we want to help people, we want to make a difference. Most of us have times in our jobs when we feel like we aren't really making much of a difference clinically. And we see how social determinants of health can impact our patients, and we can feel powerless to change those things. And that can be a contributor to burnout. So getting involved in advocacy can help us to feel like we're doing something to change those things that we can't fix with a prescription or a surgery. It can take a long time, but it works. So I'm going to close with a quote from Alice Walker. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. We have the power to advocate for the changes that we want to see in the healthcare system, and thinking somehow that our voices don't matter or that it's impossible to make change is not productive. And it's not true. I've seen it. I've seen things that we've advocated for become law. And so just believe me when I tell you that advocacy has helped me. It has helped me pull out of burnout and helped me prevent relapses of burnout. And I would encourage you, if that's something that you're interested in doing, and not everyone has to do it, but I think the majority of us need to make our voices heard. And I would encourage you to look for ways to get involved in changing the healthcare system to be one that serves us and our patients better than our current system does. There is a cartoon that I like that you can find online called The Awkward Yeti. And this cartoon basically has different organs that are humanized and they talk. And so one of my favorite ones is brain and heart are talking to each other. These cartoon characters are talking to each other. And heart is laid out on the floor. When will life be easy again? And brain says, I don't know. And heart says, I'm so exhausted. And brain says, me too. And heart's eyes are closed in the next panel and he says, I want to give up. And brain sits there, sits up, shakes his head, picks up heart by the hand and is dragging him off in the next panel and says, that's never going to happen. Don't give up. We can advocate for the changes that we need. And on that note, I'm going to sign off for the week. I hope you have a great week. Please reach out to me if I can be of service. And I hope you're enjoying the podcast. And I will talk to you again next week.